The courtroom was electric with tension. You could feel it in the air, the rustle of papers, the scrape of pens against notepads, the whispered prayers of clients whose futures hung in the balance. The jury's faces were tight, the judge's expression unreadable, and the lead attorney's hand trembled as she gripped the podium. The gavel was about to strike. The verdict, whatever it was, would ripple far beyond these walls. But in the back row sat a young man who wouldn't hear it. Jordan Miles, deaf since birth, a law intern. To everyone else in the room, he was background, polite, observant, someone learning the craft but never shaping it. Just another pair of hands sorting files. They thought the case would be decided by powerful voices, by arguments hurled across the room like weapons, by who could speak loudest, sharpest, fastest. What they didn't know was that the most powerful words in the room weren't going to be shouted, they were going to be signed. And in less than an hour, the deaf intern no one noticed would rise from silence and deliver an argument that changed the course of the trial and his own life forever. Jordan Miles grew up in neighborhoods where sirens were louder than opportunity. His mother worked 2 jobs, his father gone before Jordan could even remember his face. From the beginning, the world labeled him with limits: deaf, black, poor. Each word was treated like a ceiling pressing down on him. Teachers mistook his silence for ignorance. Classmates mocked the way his lips moved when he tried to speak, or the way his hands flew in frustration when no one understood him. The world measured his intelligence by what he couldn't hear instead of what he saw. But Jordan was sharp, sharper than anyone gave him credit for. While others memorized textbooks, Jordan memorized expressions, body language, the invisible current in a room. He read not just lips, but lies, fears, truths people tried to hide. Still, in law school, the weight of being the deaf kid in class never left. Professors slowed down when speaking to him, but sped up again the moment they turned away. Group projects left him isolated, teammates assuming he couldn't keep up. Even in his internship at one of the city's most respected firms, Jordan was treated like decoration, fetching coffee, highlighting case law someone else would argue, sitting quietly at the edge of strategy meetings while partners spoke over him, sometimes literally. He knew the unspoken thought in their minds: a deaf lawyer, cute idea, but not here, not where it matters. And so Jordan stayed in the shadows, carrying brilliance no one bothered to see, until the day the firm's biggest case, one that could save or shatter a community, began to collapse. And the only person who noticed the loophole, the only person with the answer, was the intern they'd overlooked. It was a civil rights lawsuit against a landlord who had been exploiting tenants in a crumbling apartment complex. For months, the firm had prepared, pouring money and prestige into the trial. But on the 3rd day in court, the defense unveiled a brutal surprise: an obscure clause buried in the lease agreements, a clause that, if upheld, would strip the tenants of their claim. The courtroom buzzed. The partners whispered furiously. The lead attorney's confident face faltered, just for a moment, but Jordan saw it. He always saw what others tried to hide. That night, back at the firm, everyone scrambled through case files, looking for a lifeline. Jordan stayed late too, though no one asked him to. While others complained about the impossible situation, he traced every page, his eyes sharper than ears could ever be. And then he found it. A contradiction. One tiny line where the landlord's new clause broke state housing law, invisible to those who only skimmed for sound bites. but not to Jordan. He typed it up. He signed it to his mentor. He even tried voicing it, rough and imperfect, hoping someone, anyone, would take him seriously. At first, they brushed him off. An intern? Spotting what a room full of senior lawyers missed? The silence that followed his words felt heavier than any insult. But the next morning, as the lead attorney prepared for court, Jordan made a choice. He didn't wait to be asked. He didn't wait to be allowed. He printed his notes, marched into the partner's office, and placed them on the desk. The room went quiet. The senior attorney adjusted his glasses, reading line by line. His eyes widened. His jaw tightened. Then he looked up. "You need to explain this in court." Jordan froze, his hands trembled. Him? The deaf intern? But the attorney didn't repeat it. He didn't soften it. He just handed Jordan the folder. For the first time, Jordan wasn't being dismissed. He was being called, and he knew he couldn't refuse. Jordan had never stood in front of a judge, never faced a jury, never spoken in a room where silence wasn't his choice. But that morning, as he slipped on a borrowed suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders, he felt the weight of every ignored comment, every muttered dismissal, every time someone waved off his hand signs with, "Never mind." For once they couldn't never mind him, not today. He sat in the back of the courtroom as the trial resumed, his notes pressed tightly in his hands. His mentor leaned over and whispered something he couldn't hear, but Jordan caught the meaning in his lips. "You've got this." When the moment came, it happened suddenly. The defense leaned back, smug, flashing the lease clause like a silver bullet. The jury shifted in their seats, restless. The judge glanced at the plaintiff's side, almost expectant. "Can you counter this or not?" And then Jordan felt it, his name. Not spoken, but signed by his mentor at the table. A single motion, crisp and clear. His turn. He stood. His legs felt like stone, his palms damp, but his eyes steady. Every whisper in the courtroom blurred away. Every sound was nothing but movement, lips forming words, heads turning, pens pausing. He walked forward and placed the papers on the lectern. For a second, no one breathed. A deaf intern standing at the front of the court. He began in sign language, his interpreter trailing his hands with spoken words for the record. The rhythm of it was deliberate, hands carving meaning, voice carrying conviction. "This clause," he signed, "is not just a loophole. It is a violation." He pointed to the contradiction, highlighted the breach, showed with the clarity of someone who had spent his whole life reading what others missed, exactly where the landlord's trick unraveled. The jury leaned forward. The defense attorney shifted, uncomfortable. The judge's eyebrows arched higher with every sentence. For Jordan, it was more than legal argument. It was his voice, the one no one thought could carry weight. And now it echoed in the silence of that room. By the time he stepped back, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. He could see it, not hear it, in the nodding heads, the wide eyes, the scribbled notes of jurors who finally understood. And for the first time in his life, Jordan didn't feel like he was standing in a world that spoke without him. He felt like the world was finally listening. The silence after Jordan sat down wasn't comfortable. It was sharp, loaded. The kind of silence that could tip either way. The defense attorney seized it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, smiling thinly, "what you just heard was impressive. But remember, he's an intern, not licensed, not experienced. He doesn't understand the nuance of..." Jordan didn't need to hear the words. He saw it on the man's lips, the smug curve, the dismissive tilt of his head. He knew that look. It was the same look teachers gave when they called on someone else because it would be too hard to include him. The same look neighbors gave his mother when they whispered, "Poor boy." For a moment his chest tightened. Doubt pressed down like a hand on his throat. Maybe he was out of place here. Maybe this was just a stunt, and he'd embarrassed himself in front of everyone. Then his mentor leaned forward and slid the paper back toward him, the clause, with Jordan's annotations, scribbles, arrows, underlines in red, evidence that didn't just hint at the truth, it screamed it. The judge picked it up, her eyes scanning the page. She paused, looked back at the defense. "Counselor," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a gavel, "would you like to explain this inconsistency?" The attorney's face drained. He stammered, fumbled for words. The jury's pen started moving again, but this time in Jordan's direction. Jordan sat still, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, forcing himself to breathe. He couldn't hear the shift in the room, but he could see it. The way shoulders straightened, the way jurors glanced at one another with knowing looks, the way even the defense's own paralegal avoided eye contact with their boss. And then, the moment he'd never forget, the judge leaning forward, her tone firm. "This court recognizes the validity of the plaintiff's claim, and much of that clarity comes from the evidence presented by Mr. Jordan Brooks." His mentor grinned, squeezing his shoulder. The plaintiffs' families whispered to one another, relief visible in their faces. Jordan didn't hear the verdict. He saw it. In the way the room shifted toward him, in the nods of respect, in the way even the jurors mouthed a silent thank you as they filed out. And though no applause broke out because courtrooms don't allow it, Jordan felt something deeper, a triumph that needed no sound. For the first time, his silence wasn't a disadvantage. It was the proof that he didn't need to hear the world to change it. The case became more than just a legal victory. It became a story, one that spread quietly at first through the firm's halls, then across campus, then into the wider legal community. The deaf intern who saved the case, the one everyone overlooked, until he stood in court and turned silence into strength. For Jordan, it wasn't about fame. It was about something he'd never had before, credibility. People no longer lowered their voices when they spoke to him, as if deafness meant fragility. They no longer dismissed his hands, moving in the air as background noise. They leaned in. They asked questions. They listened. And more importantly, other students, those who carried their own invisible barriers, started reaching out to him. The shy girl who stuttered in class, the immigrant student who struggled with English, the veteran with PTSD who sat in the back, always quiet. They all saw him now, not because he won a case, but because he proved that being underestimated can be a superpower. Years later, when Jordan passed the bar, the same partner who once waved him off shook his hand with pride. And when he opened his own practice, he made accessibility the cornerstone of it. Every case he took on carried a piece of his story, a reminder that justice can't just be heard, it has to be seen. But his proudest moment came not in a courtroom, but in a classroom. When he stood in front of a group of deaf high school students, telling them in sign language, "You don't need to hear the world to change it. You only need the courage to step into it." For the first time, Jordan realized his victory wasn't just his, it was theirs too. Jordan's story is a reminder that the world doesn't just run on the loudest voices. Sometimes it takes the quietest strength to shift the course of everything. How many Jordans have been overlooked around us, people dismissed because of a difference, a disability, or simply because they didn't fit the mold? How many voices go unheard, not because they lack value, but because we've trained ourselves to listen only to one kind of sound? If this story moved you, don't just scroll past. Take a moment to think about the people in your own life, the classmate, the coworker, the neighbor, who might be carrying brilliance that the world has yet to see. Encourage them, believe in them, give them space to step forward. And if you've ever felt like Jordan, unseen, underestimated, silenced, let this be your proof. Your voice matters, whether it's spoken, signed, or written in the fire of your actions. If his story inspired you, share it. Leave a comment about a time you or someone you know turned doubt into strength. And subscribe to this channel if you believe the world needs more stories of resilience, courage, and unseen victories. Because sometimes all it takes is one person daring to stand up in silence or in speech to remind us what true power looks like.